Hello, Bill.
Good afternoon, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everyone. Yeah, we're taping in the afternoon. I was on TV in the middle of the night last night, in case you missed
This is,
it.
this is very dangerous because, as faithful listeners know, afternoon Matt is low energy Matt,
Yes. Well, I took
and
it. This was nap.
worse yet, you're coming off of a night shift.
This was post nap mat that I had last night. So, so viewers, TV viewers, were not let down in any way. DMZ viewers may not be, but I do have to say I also carb loaded yesterday. I'm pretty low carb. I'm not no carb. I'm on what I call Matkins, also known as the Del Rey diet. Um, so I eat very few carbs, and then I consumed an entire pizza from Angelo's in over there by Central Park last night before going on TV. So I'm still
You had some New York pizza. You had some real pizza.
yeah, I like that stuff, and no fork and knife either, my friend. No, it was good.
What are you, the mayor?
I recommend Angelo's. It's good, and so I consumed an entire pizza by myself, and that pulled me through, man. Took a little nap,
All right.
but yeah, today I'm drinking some
Well,
coffee.
so you must have been thrilled. I know you love having the opportunity to talk about Democratic division and not Republican division.
Well, you know what, Bill? I will say that one of the points I tried to make last night a lot was, if you look at the Republicans, you had Donald Trump announcing this joint fundraising effort with the RNC. You have Trump sort of looking like the presidential person, the party that's unified around the candidate. And you have the Democrats, duking it out, still battling, and coming off, that pretty ugly incident in Nevada. So, maybe it's just a one or two news cycles, but for a brief moment there, it looked like the Republicans had their house in order and the Democrats are the party divided.
Well, and I think that in all likelihood, the Democratic convention will be the more divisive one than the Republican convention.
At this
I
point,
don't. Well, I mean, I suppose I can't know if we're going to see the non-Trump delegates want to make their voices heard on the floor in some way, if they'll push certain platform fights with the Trump delegates. But outside, the thing that really divides Trump from the rest of his party are things like the Muslim ban and building a wall. There's definitely elements of the party that don't subscribe to those things. But I don't know if even the anti-Trump delegates would want to force those issues at the convention. They might just want to get him to say, or get the platform to say, the more traditional Republican things about being anti-abortion and low taxes and all that kind of stuff, which I assume Trump wouldn't necessarily, care about. Whereas on the Democratic side, there's the potential for clashes over carbon tax, breaking up the banks, Medicare for all those sorts of things. And how exactly both Hillary and Bernie approach that is to be seen.
to me, the thing I find really interesting is how what we saw happening on the right is actually much more of a bipartisan phenomenon. Remember my book, Bill, and Too Dumb to Fail. I always argued that this was a bipartisan thing, but that the Republicans were disproportionately impacted for a variety of reasons, including the fact that Republicans don't have the bully pulpit right now. And then there was always a wonder, like, well, maybe the Democrats aren't going to go through this so bad because they've already kind of had their time in the wilderness. But there's another theory that said, no, they're just sort of postponing this day of reckoning, and it's going to hit them in a couple years. They're going to get their own Donald Trump. I really think that what we're seeing is you've got these two, really three 70-something, it's age 70 plus. This is a nostalgic campaign. They're all hearkening back to something else, a better time, whether it's the 1950s or the 60s or the 80s or whatever.
Or the 90s in the case of Clinton.
Yeah, but also the 60s in the case of Clinton. But whatever the case may be, they're all nostalgic candidates. They're all yearning for a simpler, better time, a better America. And I think they're also very angry, frustrated, disillusioned wings, especially the Bernie Sanders and the Donald Trump groups. I mean, they're both anti-trade. They're both sort of isolationist, and and I think that we've seen violence erupt in both cases. With Bernie Sanders people in Nevada and with Donald Trump in a lot of places. So I don't know. I'm fascinated by the similarities that we're seeing right now in American politics.
I mean, there's certain degrees of overlap there, but the Democratic divide is almost solely generational, and I think the Trump divide is really about race. So I think there's some differences there.
But the generations,
and
but the young people who are supporting Bernie, in a way, though, I mean, first of all, I think this is all very European. You've got a socialist against a nationalist. But it also, I mean, don't you think that the young people, it's generational in the sense that young white people basically are attracted to Bernie, but don't you think they're also sort of like hearkening back to the days when they got to be like that they're like hungry for revolution, and that they sort of are yearning for, like, why can't it be like it used to be in the old days? Like, this guitar kills fascists. You know what I mean? Like, isn't like a throwback thing?
I don't think for a millennial, it's I don't hear a lot of if only it was like the 1950s. I mean, you generally just hear the system shouldn't be rigged for corporations. I mean, and some might even argue that there was always rigged for corporations. I mean, I think there's certain elements of nostalgia in Bernie's rhetoric, but I don't hear that echoed back.
You just mentioned something else that I think is an interesting point. Rigged. Both Trump and Sanders are about delegitimizing the system. The system is rigged, even though Donald Trump won. The system is rigged. The game is rigged. These other people are manipulating everything. I'm telling you, I think that there's more of a commonality here than we think. For I don't know, just as a sociological sort of study.
I mean, I do think there is certain overlap. I mean, I wrote a piece last week that there wasn't enough overlap to actually get Bernie supporters to vote for Trump.
I agree with
lots
you
of other things where they're very, very far apart. But yeah, there's a certain degree of overlap. I mean, anytime you're running an anti-establishment campaign, there's going to be certain parallels to that. But I guess the bigger question.
But why is it that we have two? Okay, you're right. Anytime there's an anti-establishment campaign, they're gonna they're gonna sort of tap into certain things. Why is it that we have two anti-establishment campaigns right now that have both caught on? One of which hijacked a major political party. The other of which is, fighting it all the way out to Philadelphia, it seems.
I mean, we talked about this before. I mean, there's what Andrew Sullivan cited, which was I think Eric Hoffer argument from the 50s, that mass movements spark not at the nadir of an economic calamity, but at the point of the nascent recovery.
I got you to read that piece, Bill. I talked you into reading that piece, and I talked you into reading that Andrew Sullivan piece, and it's finally paying off for you. I told you had to read.
No, it. It still was a waste of most of my afternoon, but
well,
that one point I thought was a relevant point.
It's interesting, right?
I think that is an interesting point, but I think there are some dissimilarities in the types of frustration, because I think on the Republican side there's this I think an anti-immigrant the anti-immigrant aspect of it is detached from reality, because we're not even seeing a spike in immigration yet people are skateboarding immigrants, which is just weird. And I think there's the secondary element of the Republican Party being a spent intellectual force in the last 8 years, whereas if they had done some of the spade work to recover after the Bush calamity, they would have been in a stronger place to fend off a demagogic assault from Trump. So I don't think that was inevitable that a Trump type figure would hijack the party.
Well, I just think I think the problem is that the Republican, the heart wants what the heart wants. I mean, the Republican base is not where conservative intellectual philosophy is. The two are so separate. And
You're still talking a plurality. You're talking 40% of the Republican vote went to Trump.
You could have locked Paul Ryan, Dan Senor, Arthur Brooks, Ross Douthat, Ramesh Ponnuru. Go through the list. You could have locked these guys, Yuval Levin, all up in a room for 10 years in 2004 and said, like, just come up with like the best policy, ideas about entrepreneurship and optimism and human flourishing, and it would not have mattered because the base. Yeah, I heard the other day that this maybe this is common knowledge. I didn't it escaped me that instead of doing polling and stuff, that Donald Trump just had people listen to talk radio. I don't know if this is true or not, but if it's a stroke of brilliance if that's what he did, is just listen to Mark Levin and Rush Limbaugh and Laura Ingraham for 6 months, and let's be that. And that's what the base is. I don't think it's a lack. You're right. I mean, we should always have ideas, and you could. I'm never going to say, no, you're wrong, we shouldn't be working on ideas. I just don't think that would have mattered in this case.
I think if the Republican majority in Congress had a legislative agenda that was thought through, that displayed an evolution from Bush-style conservatism, that showed they had learned the lessons from the past, whether it was enacted or not, it was something that they had proven that they had done the due diligence to work out. And if you had a governor or two that enacted something along those lines successfully, you would have a substantive candidate to give to the public.
Right, but
whereas
the public wants...
people assume that the governor's bench that they had could do it just on the notion of being anti-Washington. But their actual records were very thin.
But it turns out what the public wants is nationalism and populism. And so if the Republican House,
slightly less than half wanted that, but you could have stalled that. You could have held that off if you had an alternative option. You can't beat something with nothing. They offered nothing.
That's true. I still think Donald Trump something would have beat conservative intellectual something, because look, they're taking our jobs is a much simpler argument than explaining David Ricardo and Hayek and that even
you wouldn't do it like that.
and creative destruction. No, I'm using it as a shorthand because I know you know what I'm saying. But look, if I just go through and talk about creative destruction and explain what that means, it still loses to they're taking our jobs. Don't you think? I mean, maybe on
the Democratic side, I think it. Sorry, go on.
I just think maybe if I seem depressed and down and pessimistic, it's not for a lack of coffee.
But I think on the Democratic side, it's different because I think the Democratic side is more along the lines of what Hoffer was talking about. Obama has pulled us out of the dumps, and so older Democrats say, hooray, I know how bad it's been in life, and this is pretty good, and we're on the right path, and let's keep moving forward. And if you're under 30, you just don't feel that you're in an economically secure place, and you feel like there are evil forces out there thwarting what wonderful things could await, and you aren't sold that how far we've gone is sufficient, and therefore you are discontented.
I am stunned by that, though. I really am. I am stunned by that. I am shocked that Bernie's message, which is a change message, which necessarily implies that Barack Obama was not a great president, has succeeded to the degree that it has. I am surprised by that.
Mm-hmm. And so, but the question going forward is which side's division is greater and deeper and more permanent. You still see in most national polling Clinton beating Trump. So that says to me that the Republican division is still deeper than the Democratic division. and almost every, I mean, you see in the, I mean, there's different polling out there, of course,
Right.
and the numbers range from, Rasmussen had Trump ahead by 2. Yeah, that's the only one that has Trump ahead.
They tend to
There's another
undersample Democrats, as I recall.
Yeah, and so they're
Oversample
not the most
Republicans.
reputable.
Bill, I think I was thinking about this today. I actually tweeted it. Believe it or not, I was able to make this 140 characters somehow. But when I think about the race in terms of, if you say, like, I want you to think about the demographics and I want you to think about the Electoral College and put together a map, then I think Hillary wins. But if you say to me, who has the most compelling message? Who's the change versus more of the same candidate? I mean, Hillary Clinton's the status quo. Trump is the change guy. Who projects the most strength in a time when people are afraid? It's Donald Trump. I mean, this is like math versus message. I mean, if I'm thinking math, then I'm thinking Hillary. If I'm thinking message, I'm actually thinking Trump.
Well, I want to talk about the Politico piece that I wrote, where I drew a Sanders Nader parallel, which a lot of people talked about because they were mad at me that I threw Nader into the mix. But a piece that I wrote that nobody talked about was, should Hillary channel Warren Harding? And I did that for Real Clear Politics, and Warren Harding, his campaign message in 1920 was back to normalcy.
Yeah.
This is after 8 years of Woodrow Wilson, a lot of attempt at progressive reforms, a lot of economic upheaval. There was World War I. There was the backlash against the League of Nations push. There was a lot of labor unrest and race rioting that occurred after the war was done, because Wilson didn't have a thought-through reintegration plan when the troops came back. And so there's a lot of unsettled feelings in 1920, and Harding comes out saying we need, we don't need revolution, we need adjust. We don't need agitation, we need adjustment. We don't need.
It's a very conservative
revolution.
It's a very conservative sentiment. Although I think he might have invented
right.
He might have invented the term.
So
was normalcy actually a word before he made it one? I don't know. But otherwise, it's a very conservative philosophy.
So my theory in the piece was, you might think after 8 years of Obama, been a very dramatic time, lots of changes, unsettling to some. The economy is not quite where everybody wants it to be. You might have the seeds for a backlash and going the other way, and a change type message working for the opposing party. But what we've had in the past year is media saturation of Trump, not Obama.
Yeah.
And Trump's unfavorables going through the roof in that time, which suggests maybe we're not experiencing Obama fatigue. We're experiencing Trump fatigue, which can only get worse over the next 6 months.
I think,
and so not that Hillary would.
I think. So I think you're overplaying that, but I really think. I mean, I think there's a chance that Trump destroys Hillary in one of these debates. She's not as fast on her feet as he is, and he will go there. He will say things that are so unchivalrous. I
fundamentally disagree with that. He is not fast in debates. He is a poor debater. He has lost every debate. He survived with post-debate media saturation. The actual debate performances by him were always terrible.
No, I disagree. I think, you're right if you care about substance, but nobody cares about substance. In terms of zingers and one-liners and put-downs, and coming out as the alpha male, he wins. And I think that's what he's going to do to Hillary.
I don't feel like his put-downs at the debates were that good.
They were. Yes,
he's good when it's a set performance.
But look, here's why I think, Bill, this is actually leading me to praise you. I come not to criticize Bill Scher. I think that Hillary should have a task force or a special unit of comedians who do nothing but find ways to make fun of Donald Trump every day. And along those lines, who would be a better vice president? Who would be a better running mate to help deliver these daily attacks and mockery and jokes against Donald Trump than a former comedian? Names.
Well, you know where I am on.
And by the way, you're not getting enough credit
for
this. I'm seeing other people now bringing up Al Franken's name and not mentioning Bill Scher. So that's not cool.
Well, you
I'm
know,
calling.
you know where it
Start
started.
calling him out.
But in that scenario, you don't want Hillary doing that. You want Hillary to be above the fray. You know, let Franken or somebody else do the dirty work of dealing with the Trump
somebody
nonsense.
needs to do it.
Hillary,
Somebody needs to do it. It needs to be done.
Sure. But
Obama
Hillary
could do it. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but Obama could. Obama would do it. He did it at a graduation commencement speech. What Obama? You don't need a. I think Obama could.
He'll pick his spots.
I mean, I think what I'm saying is if Obama were
every day,
if
but
Obama were the candidate, he wouldn't need a surrogate. He would be able to mock and belittle Trump himself. I don't know why Hillary necessarily.
Obama is very good at that.
Really
Obama did it at the correspondence dinner. You know,
I know that might have.
Ago.
Some people think that goaded Trump into running.
But to go back to the Ward Harding point, I think Hillary can basically say, I mean, it's not literally, it's not exactly what Harding did, but she could basically say, what you're seeing from Trump, a preview of an unsettling, chaotic future for the country and the world. Whatever you think of me, you may not agree with me on this position or that position. You might have questions about, my behavior on the emails or what have you. But I exude stability and security and safety. You can, if you are unsettled by what you see on your screen every day in this Trump madhouse, know that a President Clinton will be a tonic to all of that. And I think what's deeper there is it would establish what is normal. What is normal is Obama-style activist liberal government.
All right. Well, Bill, I do. I know we've got a couple more topics, but I do want to just before we go on say that I had a cool experience the other night. I was at Jonathan Capehart had a viewing party. He was on Jeopardy, and he had a party to watch it. And I'm at the bar, and a guy comes up to me, sidles up next to me. He does something at the Washington Post, and he says. He goes, I don't know you from CNN, and I don't know you from your book, and I don't know you from the Daily Caller. I know you because I watch Blogging Heads, your Blogging Heads show every single week, and I love it. So I thought it was worth mentioning here.
And so what TV producers did you shepherd that person around to at the party?
Well, it's just good to hear some amazing feedback that people, really like what we do and like this show and watch it, and that's pretty awesome to hear. So thank you.
Did Jonathan Capehart win Jeopardy?
No, he did well though. He performed well, but Louis C.K. actually won Jeopardy that night.
Now that was Wednesday night.
Yeah.
On Thursday night, I don't know if you saw who won that round of Power Players Jeopardy, but it was humble, unheralded Senator Al Franken. And as you may know, in 1940, it was a quiz show. That quiz show was a radio quiz show called Information Please, where Wendell Willkie's star turn sparked his presidential bid, storming the convention only a few months later because people were so dazzled by his wit and knowledge and sophistication. Obviously, the presidential nomination slots are filled, but could it be that Franken's Jeopardy star turn will be the beginning of his path to the vice presidential nomination?
Well, I don't know about that, Bill, but I will say I'm increasingly starting to think that the way to go after that Bill Clinton, I'm increasingly starting to think that Donald Trump, could win this thing, and that he's going to dominate the media narratives, and he's I think he could destroy Hillary in a debate, and I think that the only way to beat him is to mock him.
There's a New York Times poll that came out Thursday night. So had Clinton beating Trump by 6 while losing 28% of Bernie's supporters. So even though she lost that much, she was still beating Trump in a two-way race. So as long as that lead is significant enough, you can lose a few. There was another poll by Public Policy Polling, which actually included the likely main third-party candidates, Libertarian Gary Johnson and Green Party's Jill Stein. And in that poll, Clinton was still ahead. I think she was, if memory serves, she was ahead by 6 in a two-person race, and it went down to 4 points when you included the third-party candidates. And when you put Sanders in instead of Hillary, Sanders gets the 2 points back. So you could say, okay, it is the Sanders support. And 2 points is about 2.5 million voters, which is roughly what Ralph Nader got in 2000. So I wrote a piece in Politico saying, is Sanders 2016 becoming Nader 2000? Obviously Sanders doesn't want to be a spoiler. He purposely ran the primary so he would not be a third-party spoiler. He never endorsed all the Nader bids. He says he's going to do everything to stop Trump. He says he'll support the eventual nominee. So it's not that he's trying to pursue that path, but it's possible that you would have a similar result because of the lingering bad feelings and the policy differences. And it would only matter if the gap between Hillary and Trump narrowed more. So my piece was about how Sanders could avoid being blamed for that kind of outcome and in turn maintain and maximize his influence within the party. I got a lot of blowback from Bernie supporters and Nader fans, apparently. Most prominently, Sean King, who's the New York Daily News columnist and a very active Bernie supporter, wrote a whole column criticizing the piece, saying that it's one of the many outrageous calls for Bernie to drop out, and that there's no comparison between Sanders and Nader because Sanders had a few points as a third-party candidate, and Bernie has won 20 states as a primary candidate. Yeah. And my rebuttal
Bill, really, wouldn't you say that Eugene McCarthy? I mean, I'm spitballing here, but I would say Eugene McCarthy is maybe a more apt analogy. I'm not sure why you went there with Nader.
Well, I did mention McCarthy, and as Matt is needling me because I prompted him to make a McCarthy reference on CNN at 1 o'clock in the morning, which apparently went over everybody's head, but it's the right point to make. I mean, that is the most direct parallel to what could happen if you had an unruly convention and the runner-up didn't endorse after that convention. That is very analogous to what happened with McCarthy. And there's an argument that McCarthy tipped 5 states to Nixon by encouraging his supporters to not get behind Hubert Humphrey. But Nader pushes people's buttons, and people's buttons got pushed, and Trevor got mad at me. But my response to the King was, I said in the piece that they're not exactly the same. And I said in the piece that Bernie does not need to drop out, that he could follow Jesse Jackson's model of 88. So McCarthy left the convention embittered. Jesse Jackson was relatively pugnacious, but he also wanted to keep the Democratic tent united. He negotiated a platform that he considered that bent in his direction. What he couldn't get in the platform, he put on the floor. Had some floor fights, but he didn't make too big of a spectacle out of it. And he endorsed the ticket at the convention. So some people came back at me and said, "Well, Jesse Jackson didn't have a lot of influence after that, so why is that such a great model?" Well, he says he did. He said even though Clinton, went in a more moderate direction than he might have liked, that he still maintained influence with him and got some things that he wanted over the next 8 years. And by keeping his people in the fold, if he didn't do that, Clinton wouldn't have won, and Barack Obama wouldn't have won if the party had deeply fractured. Whereas look at Jim McCarthy or Ralph Nader; those guys had zero influence after their bid. So relatively speaking, Jesse came out better than they did, and Bernie could follow his path.
Yeah, I don't think people remember. I mean, Al Sharpton now has sort of transcended him, but Jesse Jackson for a long time was the civil rights leader, wouldn't you say, of the late 20th century.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he seized that position because of the presidential runs, and maintained it for a long time thereafter. And I get that there are some Bernie people, just want to blow up the whole Democratic Party and say that's a spent force and it's neoliberal corporatism and we want nothing to do with it. If that's your opinion, that's your opinion. I'm not going to make someone change their view. It's not Bernie's opinion.
Well,
Bernie has said he wants to stay a Democrat and wants to change the party.
Let me bring it back to where we just were, though, Al Franken. So if Hillary were to pick Al Franken, how is that received by the Bernie Sanders wing of the party?
Well, I can only speak anecdotally from what I get in responses on Twitter and Facebook, and for that, frankly, because I got a lot. I mean, there are definitely there are a number of people that said Franken would make it okay for me to vote for Hillary. That would bring me along, and others have said he endorsed Hillary. He's another corporate shill. Screw him. I mean, if you're in a position that anyone who has endorsed Hillary is therefore unacceptable, you're probably not going to be brought along by anybody. I mean, anyone, even if you were, if you picked Bernie or picked Warren, I mean, they would then endorse Hillary and endorse her platform. So, I mean, it is possible that there are some people who are going to leave the party, and that's it. Or those people were never in the party in the first place. That they weren't even Obama 2012 voters, and they're effectively Greens or Independents, and they're just never going to be appeased. So I would no one's going to bat 1,000. I think Franken would go as far as about anybody who is plausible on the table.
Well, one thing is for sure, though, you are continuing your deliverable here of injecting history into the conscious of the political conscious and helping to sort of put things in context and perspective with that. And I think it's good that you got this fight. I mean, even though I know you included these, these caveats and these to be sure, parts in the piece, it's good that this guy ignored it, and because you want that this controversy is good for business, Because
people don't read. Everyone got mad at the headline and didn't read the rest of the piece. And the point of the piece was that here's what Bernie can do, and I thought, namely, he can stay in the race, he can fight for the platform, but he should give on the rules reform, because this notion that the whole game is rigged is very corrosive. I mean, if you feel like the party doesn't want you there and has tried to thwart you, that's not an incentive to stay in such a party. Mm-hmm. But the things that Bernie complains about, superdelegates and closed primaries, those things were not what stopped the candidacy. Bernie lost the open primaries. Bernie lost the pledge delegate count. So why make a big stink about that when it's not really what you got in this race to talk about? So I think he's going down a bad path there. And I was arguing for a course correction for his interest, but no one wanted to read past the second paragraph to figure that out.
Well, and they question whether or not you're sincere about his interest. But look, I would say two things. One, you're probably right. I mean, we only have so much juice, and you can either expend your capital on changing the primary process, or you can expend your capital on changing public policy and pushing it in a progressive direction. That's why he ran. That's what he should focus on. But again, I've talked about this. I've written about this a lot at the Daily Caller. I see all these things in common between Trump and Sanders, and one of the things that they both have in common is that they both put the system on trial and delegitimized the political process, I think, in some ways. And when you call it corrosive, I think you're exactly right. I mean, it's an incredibly dangerous thing. I mean, look, I'm not saying that getting rid of superdelegates in the Democratic Party would bring about the end of the republic, but I think that the larger sort of concept that the system is rigged, the game is rigged, that is a dangerous, trail to start going down.
Now, you said a nice thing about me that I bring some value added to these discussions. You wrote a piece suggesting that 538's Nate Silver is not bringing a value added. That he has that by botching it on Trump, because he went deep on saying that in 2015, don't listen to these polls. This is ephemeral, and sanity will eventually manifest, and that didn't happen. You're suggesting that this is sort of fundamentally discrediting.
Right. Look, we all get predictions wrong. Bill, you more than anybody have made bad predictions, but the beauty is that's not what people read you for. I mean, we read you because you enrich our lives, you provide historical context, you write these thought-provoking pieces, and that's your deliverable, right? Other people, if you're Robert Cox,
your food doesn't taste good, but I eat it because at least will let me not die.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are people who, there are people whose credibility rests on having great sources in the House Budget Committee or whatever, and that's their bread and butter. So if they botch a prediction, it doesn't matter. If they botch like a horse race prediction, it doesn't matter because they've got these great sources. Other people write with flowery prose, and they're just beautiful reads, and they don't have to always be right. You want to read them anyway. But the whole thing about Nate Silverez, his entire raison d'etre is that he gets things right, that he makes accurate predictions. And the truth is that after having a pretty great run from 2008 to 2012, he was wildly celebrated. And he sort of got on his high horse and sort of insinuated that data journalism is all that matters and that everything else is mere punditry and commentary, and that reporting and narratives that's old. What counts is data journalism. And I think that for all of those reasons, it's fair to now bring up the fact that he's been wrong a lot lately, including missing this, what might be the primary election of the century, that he was wildly wrong about, saying that not only that Trump only had a 5% chance of winning the nomination, but that if you were worried about Trump, if you were sort of had your panties in a bunch about Trump, that you were some sort of a kook. That was the implication.
So, I mean, I think Nate Silver's even said this, that he's copped to the mistake. He said he made the mistake because he was acting like a pundit and not following the data. I mean, Trump was leading in the polls the whole time. The argument at the time was that lots of people like this have good early poll numbers and they fade, so we should expect this to fade. And when it was going on for months and months and months, people didn't adjust their assumptions quick enough that she was showing stability and he wasn't fading as fast as, say, a Ross Perot did, or Herman Cain, or what have you. So he's at least laid it out there. I mean, should this at least not make us say, data journalism is ridiculous and only shoe leather reporting counts? The numbers tell us nothing. I mean, that's not what the mistake was here, and it's not that shoe leather reporting is bad. I mean, but part of the problem is there was no overemphasis before on the anecdotal, and often the anecdotal is misleading. For example, people were saying, wow, Bernie has these huge crowds in New York City. Clearly, he's going to have a big day. And they got trounced in New York City because the anecdote didn't tell you the full picture. So don't you still need both? Don't you still want to have good? I mean, there's good data journalism and bad data journalism. You can interpret data badly. It's possible. But you still want to have a data journalism piece of your media operation to go along with your other kinds of reporting, don't you?
Yeah, totally. It should be part of a well-balanced diet, but not the end-all be-all of reporting. And look, he's gotten a lot of stuff wrong lately. He's gotten a couple Super Bowls wrong, I think. He's gotten the Oscars wrong. He's gotten British elections wrong, Scottish recall, whatever that was over there, wrong. He's gotten a lot wrong for a guy who is wildly celebrated for getting things right, and also for being kind of condescending toward other forms of journalism. Look, I mean, I think that politics is complicated, and it's a fatal conceit to think that you've got it all figured out, because number one, the sample size are so small. I mean, we've only had X number of elections. Polls are only as good. We joke about the poll truthers and skewed polls, but you make assumptions in terms of what what turnout's going to look like, and if you get those assumptions wrong, then you could have every other part of your polling could be impeccable. But if you've made wrong assumptions about turnout, then there's just the point being is that I think for a while we had this sort of utopian idea that we had figured it all out, and that no need to like stand in the snow in Des Moines anymore, because Nate Silver was going to plug this into his, algorithm, I don't know, model, and spit out like all the wisdom, and it just doesn't work that way. So anyway, my hope is that this return brings some balance to the universe and returns us to a place where we can incorporate it into what we do, but that we shouldn't. Look, here's the real scary part is, and Bill, I know we're on a time crunch, but real quick, I actually think there's a chance that he impacted the race because he was so respected that I think what he did was, remember how people never freaked out? Like I was like, why aren't Republicans freaking? Like at some point, Republicans need to freak out and like hit the panic button and like do something. You know what I mean? And it just never happened. Like people just kept thinking Trump was going to implode on his own, and he just never did. And right. I think it's possible that part of the reason is that people believe Nate Silver. That when he said "Don't panic," that they were like, "Okay, we're not gonna panic," and they should have panicked.
That's why people get. I'm sure people get mad at you. People get mad at me when I write something and the headline frames in a certain way, and they say you're shaping a media narrative and you're ruining everything. Why don't you let the people vote? And think, how many times have pundit headlines been proved totally meaningless, or have not actively created the opposite result that the suggestion right. would be? So. I mean, I think people can calm down that pundits are somehow pulling the strings of society and brainwashing people to do things what the establishment wants to do. But I agree with you that I certainly the Republican establishment, were asleep at the switch, and I think it's plausible that not just Nate specifically, but a lot of commentary that this was going to fade on its own would say, why should I get my hands dirty trying to beat it down if it's gonna fade on its own accord?
Yeah, or even like even Ted Cruz's decision to like hug Trump for months and kiss up to him. I mean, maybe that was at least. You can't blame it all on any one person, but maybe that was partly informed by this. I mean, there was a consensus among the best and brightest that this was not a problem, and they were wrong. You know who got it right? There's a guy named John Ziegler. I don't know if you remember this guy, David Foster Wallace. Wrote a great essay called, I think it's called The Talk Show Host or something. This guy was a talk radio host, and then he made a Sarah Palin. He was somehow like doing a Sarah Palin documentary or something. Anyway, he wrote a piece at Mediaite at the time saying, no, you should freak out. And he nailed it. He was exactly right. I went back and read it. Everything he said was right for what that's worth. So,
all right.
Anyway, great show, Bill.
I'm sorry I have to jump abruptly, but I do.
No problem.
But I'll talk to you next week.
All right. Check out Bill's piece in Politico magazine and my piece at Roll Call, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.
Take care.